now. But ChatGPT is still just a thing that predicts what the next word is going to be. It produces generic milquetoast output that's confidently wrong about a lot of things. It's going to help spammers and maybe have a little bit of real-world use, right? But I thought, okay, let's put my text description in, tell it to translate this into this obscure Google Apps script, see what it does. And it wrote the code for me in a few seconds. And I felt this pit of the stomach, existential horror, and at that moment I couldn't explain why, but I figured it out later. It's just predicting the next word. The code it gave back was a bit wrong, but frankly, my first attempt would have been a bit wrong. So I asked it in plain English to fix a couple of the errors it had spotted, and it did, and that version was nearly right. Not quite though. It used a really strange approach. I tried to work out why it had done that, and then I realised I could just ask. And it told me, in English, why it had done that. And it had made the same mistake I did with my backup. Because turns out Google's documentation is wrong. Google Apps Script itself treats labels as attaching to threads, not messages. Google wrote their own programming language wrong. So I told ChatGPT about the error, and it fixed the script. It bodged its way around Google's bad documentation to build the thing I was actually asking for. And after all the back and forths, I didn't actually save much time, but it was so much easier. I never had to pore through documentation to find the exact specific magical incantation that I needed. Also, my coding skills are years out of date. That's one of the reasons I don't make computer science videos anymore. The last time I learned a new thing in code was probably 2015. My old skills were good enough, I didn't want to change my workflow. I'm not sure if ChatGPT is a better coder than I am, but it felt about equal. It felt like watching while someone wrote code with me occasionally chiming in and going, I think you might have made a mistake there. And sometimes I was the one who made the mistake. At one point, I realised I'd written the wrong thing in that first text description. ChatGPT had just been following my wrong instructions. I know, it's just a text model that predicts what word comes next, but it didn't feel like it. So at first I thought that pit of the stomach, existential dread feeling was because my brain had gone, that's a human, or that's an alien intelligence. Or because I was starting to think, well, what if my brain is just a transformer system that's trying to predict what the next word is? I'm sure I remember some old pop science article about how your brain's a prediction engine, and surprise is just a fancy word for being wrong about what comes next. But then the next day, I gave ChatGPT a more difficult problem, one that required not just translating English to code, but actually a little bit of a logical leap, and it just confidently, completely failed in multiple obvious ways. And that meant that I wasn't worried about it coming for my job. Not yet, anyway. Sure, no one's asked for that exact problem to be solved before, the one about the labels and messages. ChatGPT wasn't just copying and pasting from somewhere, there was arguably creativity involved. But if I'm honest, a lot of the programming I used to do was just copying and pasting bits from somewhere. At some point, every modern programmer searched on Google or Stack Overflow and adapted something that someone else wrote. It's basically part of the job at this point. I'm deliberately avoiding the argument about creativity, AI art, and copyright, by the way. I don't know how I feel about it, and I don't know how the courts will resolve it. If I hired a human artist or musician to create a painting or song in a more famous artist's style, that would be weird, but it would be legal, as long as they're not pretending to be the famous artist, as long as the smaller artist is not trading on their name. That's fine. The style of most of my videos on this channel is just a slightly faster version of the TV shows I watched growing up. That's what this intelligence was trained on. And this video is basically in the style of every other video essayist on YouTube. It's just I tend to go to the beach a bit more often. If someone set up an AI to generate YouTube videos, or even YouTube educational videos as a genre, I think I'd be fine with that. I don't think I'd have a problem with my work being a small part of a massive pool of training data. But if someone started ripping off specifically my name and my work, yeah, I can see why artists are furious about that. The British legal term for it is passing off. I've said before, please don't train models on what I make, or frankly on anyone specific without their consent. But okay, I wasn't worried about being replaced, and I wasn't worried that I was actually talking to some human equivalent alien artificial intelligence. So why did I still have that feeling of dread? Artificial intelligence, text transformers and diffusion models, everything that we're currently seeing seems to be on that sigmoid curve of progress, and I don't know what point on that curve we've got to. If we're already most of the way up the curve, then cool, programmers and artists have brand new tools, but they can't create something at a human level with them. It's not going to take many jobs, it's going to make people's work more efficient, the same way that loads of inventions like Photoshop have done before. If we're at the middle of that curve, then wow, we are going to get some really impressive new tools very soon that still need some humans to work them. Maybe Siri and the Google Assistant are going to become the things that they were always promised to be. But that feeling of dread came from the idea that ChatGPT and the new AI art systems might be to my world what Napster was to the late 90s, the herald. The first big warning that this new technology, the thing that was going to change everything, was starting to actually change everything, where huge numbers of people, not just the nerds, were actively using it. And it didn't matter that Napster got sued out of existence, because by then there was Morpheus and Grokster and LimeWire and Kazaa, and then there was Spotify. The old business model, that idea that you bought a copy of music, had been struck a mortal blow, and no one noticed it for a while. If you hear echoes of the Napster case in the lawsuits against AI art programs, so do I. I was getting a haircut the other week, and unprompted, the barber started talking about ChatGPT and how he'd actually used it to write a formal email that he couldn't be bothered to put together himself. He wasn't a particularly technical person, he wasn't a nerd like me, but he'd used it easily, the same way that someone who wanted to get a load of music for free would figure out Napster. It's not about ChatGPT, not specifically. It's about what it represents. Because if we're still at the start of the curve for AI, if we're at the Napster point, then everything is about to change, just as fast and just as strangely as it did in the early 2000s, perhaps beyond all recognition, and this time I'm on the wrong end of it. I'm like the music executive back in '99. It feels to me like something might have just gone very wrong for the now comfortable world that I grew up with and that I've settled down in. That's where the dread came from. The worry that suddenly I don't know what comes next. No one does. I've been complaining for years that it feels like nothing has really changed since smartphones came along. And I think that maybe I should have been careful what I wished for. At some point, I'll look back on this video and with hindsight, I will easily be able to see where we were on the curve. We all will. Part of me hopes that I am entirely wrong, that in a few years I'll still be working like this. The email thing is a metaphor, of course. It won't be email folders for you. It might be something else, something you're attached to, maybe something minor, or maybe the whole industry you work in. But right now, that feeling, that creeping horror, that dread, it turns out that was the worry that after years of being fairly steady and comfortable, my world is about to change.